Before we dive into the good stuff, and I have a lot of good stuff, I'm going to share a lot of data with you today. I want to start by introducing myself to you and telling you a little story. So between 2020 and 2022, I was one of those crazy people that were hunting for their forever home. If you were in that same position, you know exactly what that was like. You had very little time to look at the home. When you did, you had to offer everything but your firstborn child, and hopefully they really loved the letter and the picture you submitted, and maybe the house would become yours. By a stroke of luck, in October of 2022, we got the dream home. The perfect house at the end of a cul-de-sac. We could grow into it with our family that we hope to have someday. We had tons of property. We put an offer in, I think, 72 hours after it was listed. We went into both open houses. I saw it twice for about 30 minutes each before signing my life away. And then it was time to close. And when we closed, we took 2 weeks off of work, and I had 17 days. I had 17 days and really big plans for those 17 days. And I've always been, don't laugh at my big plans, I've always been a bit of a dreamer, but I would say this was a little aggressive. By day 4, we realized, there's more plans. By day 4 of day 17 of PTO, we realized that perhaps those plans aren't going to come true, and we needed to recalibrate. So instead of boiling the ocean, we chose to do 5 things. And when I tell you we had a lot to do on this house, I mean like everything from the doorbell to the floors to the walls to the trim to the driveway, everything has to be updated. So we chose 5 things to focus on in the remaining 13 days. And those 5 things had the highest impact that would help us get into this home before our movers came, to help us set up for the beginning of our future here. Now at this point, you're probably saying, Jess, that's like a really good story, but what does that have to do with HR and family care benefits? And it has to do with the fact that you all are recalibrating too. Every single year, we survey over 500 HR and benefit leaders, and we ask them about their benefit priorities for the coming year. And in the research I'm going to show you in the next 14 minutes and 3 seconds is going to be about just that. Employers are recalibrating their benefits to focus on the most impactful benefits to support their strategy for driving productivity and recruiting and retaining their top talent. Now, how many employers are recalibrating, you ask? Well, 95%. All but 5% of you say that you are recalibrating your benefits in 2023. And of the 95% of you that say you're recalibrating your benefits, 47% of you say that you are actually going to trim your benefits this year. That's not surprising to hear that, given the state of the economic uncertainty that we're sitting in right now. But we asked employers, when you're trimming your benefits or reprioritizing your benefits, what are you designing your benefits program for? 53% of employers are designing their benefits program to focus on productivity. 49% of employers are designing their benefits program to focus on recruiting and retaining top talent. Now, if you take a step back, this makes perfect sense. We all have limited resources, and with those limited resources, we have to maintain a level of productivity to drive success for our business, productivity. And with those limited resources, of which include people, if we were to lose them, that is an expensive loss for us to sacrifice if we as employers cannot figure out how to keep them, recruiting and retaining top talent. One of the most surprising takeaways from the survey this year was when we asked you all, who exactly are you designing your benefits for? And you can see overwhelmingly on the screen behind me that benefits are primarily designed for the full-time salaried corporate employees versus the employees that may be on your front line. For instance, specifically in the retail industry, which is highly dependent on hourly employees, 46% of respondents said that their benefit strategy is focused on the professional and knowledge-based hybrid employees. And in food and hospitality, 58% said the same. Now, 73% of the American workforce, if you were with me about an hour ago, cares for a loved one, and they need help. When we think about the number of employees in your hourly workforce that you have, knowing that 73% of them caring for a loved one, if your benefits program isn't designed to support them, we have a little bit of a gap that we have to solve for. So the next question is, what exactly is on the chopping block? And some of you may agree with this, but what we've seen from the data is that benefits that perhaps are a little more focused on a niche group or a little more nice to have, or benefits that can be cut without making a significant impact are the ones that are being deprioritized or chopped this year. This also makes sense if we rewind and we think about the core goals that our HR leaders have: driving productivity and recruiting and retaining top talent. I love care.com. I've been there for almost 7 years. If they take away my gym membership, I'm okay. I'm gonna survive. But if something were to happen and our caregiving benefits were to go away, specifically the ones that I use to care for my grandmother or the ones that I hope to use someday to raise a family, I'm gonna have to question what's going on. So what's staying? I gave you a little bit of a spoiler alert, but 46% of employers are prioritizing childcare in 2023, more than they were last year in 2022. 43% are saying the same exact thing about senior care, prioritizing it more in 2023 than in 2022. So by now, after 3 years of chaos and change, we have all read the same headlines. We've read Forbes and the Wall Street Journal and the Times and every other outlet in between that talked about the struggles that working caregivers have and why it's up to employers to help solve for the gaps that they need. 73%, you're going to hear me say this again, of your workforce is a working caregiver. That is the majority of your workforce. And if they can't show up for you to work, you, my friends, have a little bit of a business problem. I think it's safe to say now that having a family-friendly workplace is no longer an option. I think there's a fundamental change in expectations of employees and hopefully in employers for prioritizing this kind of support for our workforce. Now, there is a fundamental problem in our society with our caregiving infrastructure. When we talk about supporting working caregivers and the ones that they love, we're talking about doing a few things. Addressing their problems around accessibility. How can I access care? Addressing their problems around quality. How do I access quality care? And then third problem is how do I solve for the problem of affordability? Because caregiving is one of the most expensive line items in your employee's monthly budget. There's big impact from these problems. For childcare, an estimated 50 million workers, which is 1/3 of the US workforce, has a child under 14 at home. And more than 1 in 4 families with children under the age of 5 are still struggling to find consistent childcare. Now, if you were here a little bit ago when I did that introduction, I told you that over half of the United States lives in what is called a childcare desert. And if you missed that definition, what that means is that for every 1 licensed daycare slot, there are 5 children who need care. The problem also extends to senior care. 1 in 6 of working Americans is already caring for an aging loved one, and 70% of those caregivers suffer work-related difficulties. My grandmother lives in a log cabin in the middle of the woods in Western New York. So for you New Yorkers, you got to go an hour north and then like 6 hours west. She lives in a log cabin in the middle of the woods in Western New York, and she has a horrible memory. And we're doing everything we can to keep her in that log cabin because we know that's where she's happiest. But the day that my mom called me and said, Jess, I think we have a problem, I can promise you I was not productive that day. 70% of employees who care for their aging loved ones, like I said, suffer work-related difficulties, lost productivity. Now, I've demonstrated to you that there's an impact and there's an audience of these caregiving problems, but there's also undeniable economic challenges. There's ripple effects when we think about the lack of caregiving needs and what that means for your workforce, your employees, and our economy. First and foremost, women are leaving the workforce. This is a headline we have all read. Today, we are recovering from the diminished workforce participation of women who left during the past 2 to 3 chaotic years. 26% of women who became unemployed during the pandemic did so because of a lack of childcare. It's expensive to replace the employees who leave the workforce, and for those who haven't, it's costing employers billions in absenteeism due to gaps in childcare. The problem does not stop when we start talking about senior care. 1/3 of those caring for an aging loved one, 1/3 of people like my mother and my aunts and myself have left the workforce because of the challenges and the cost of caring for somebody that they love. Even more money, when we think about absenteeism, is lost because of these senior caregiving challenges. Another one of my favorite parts from the research is when we asked employers if you could only choose one benefit, because we're going to play this fun little game in this survey, and I'm going to tell you that we have these big problems, but you can only choose one family caregiving benefit. Which one would you choose? And they prioritized senior care this year. This is the first time that senior care has outpaced child care in terms of demand. In fact, employers said that 32% of employers said that they're receiving more senior care requests versus the 30% of employers said that they're receiving more child care requests. It's also important to note that these requests are not specific to older employees. I'm 33 years old. I am a prime candidate for needing senior care support. 1 in 5 adults are unpaid family caregivers, and they span multiple generations. There are 11 million people in the sandwich generation, and the majority of that generation are millennials, just like the majority of our active workforce. 40% of millennials have been caring for an elderly parent since the health crisis, compared to 34% of Gen X and 13% of the baby boomers. And the takeaway here is to not make assumptions. Do not make assumptions that just because somebody doesn't have a child at home, that they don't need senior care needs. Don't make an assumption that because they do have a child at home, that they don't have senior care needs. Caregivers are working hard, but they're also incredibly worried. In a recent study, 71% of employees in Gen Z said that they do not feel supported by their employer, and 70% said they will lose their job because of their caregiving responsibilities. Gen Z, younger than me. We asked those that we surveyed to select the reasons why with a strategic value that they see in family care benefits. And you can see here that it's reiterating everything that I just told you. It's to retain top talent, to drive productivity, to support the DE&I initiatives that they have in their workforce. But unfortunately, I think the problem of work-related difficulties for caregivers is only going to get worse. Every single year in June, we launched something called the Cost of Care Survey. And in 2022, we learned that over half of working parents said they spend more than 20% of their annual salary on childcare. Over 70% said they spend 10% or more. Now, when you think about your bills and your mortgage and your groceries and your transportation costs, if childcare is taking up 10 to 20% of that, there's a sacrifice that has to be made. As for elder care, the 2030s will mark the first time, the 2030s, in 7 years, it will mark the first time in US history that the population of people 65 and older will outpace the population of people under the age of 18. Here's another study. A recent study of 1,000 American parents with children through the age of 5, 69% of female job seekers said they would be more likely to choose to work for you if you offered childcare benefits. 83% of women and 81% of men. 81% of men say that with childcare benefits, they are more likely to stay with you as an employer. There's study after study after study of this. This has been in the news for years. But then the question comes, is it only up to employers to solve for this problem? Personally, I think the answer is no. It is not only up to employers to solve for this problem. We know that there is some support from federal and local government to help with that, but we also know that there's some confusion about what that support covers, and there's a desire for that support to be more flexible. 68% of our respondents say that they favor flexible childcare solutions over the standard on-site child care centers that they have at their workforce, which typically is what is used for some of the credits from the government. We know that 83% of those who don't currently take advantage of government support would do so if the guidelines were just a little bit more flexible. I've shared a lot of information with you. Probably some of you are thinking about your own caregiving needs. And then if you can just take a minute and think about one employee that has caregiving needs that you know of, you know that this problem stems far and wide. I've been at CARE for almost 7 years, like I said. And when I started, our clients represented the most privileged of companies. We worked with big tech. We still do. We work with law firms, financial consulting, recruiting, those who have lucrative funds to recruit and retain their top talent. And in the past 7 years, I've seen our client base shift a little bit to better represent the demographics of the American workforce. This gives me a little bit of hope that this is catching on, and that as passionate as I am about screaming from the rooftops that child care and senior care benefits are not a nice to have, they're a must have in order for every single one of us to do our jobs, I think things are catching on. I have 3 resources for you. You can take screenshots of these QR codes and download them yourself, or you can stop by the CARE booth, but I'm gonna give you tips on how to get started, because I just laid out this massive problem for you, and my job is to help you solve for that problem. First and foremost, you need to survey your workforce. And when you're surveying your workforce, it's not a question of which benefits would you like? They're not the benefit leaders. They don't know what the landscape has. Ask them questions about what is causing you stress on a day-to-day basis. What are the daily distractions and the major life events that you expect to happen to you and your family this year? The next resource I have for you is this research. Everything I shared with you today is right here in this research. Again, you're welcome to stop by, and I'll give you this QR code again. We release this report every single year, and every single year there's a new trend that we recognize. The third tool that I have for you is a tool to evaluate the market. I am one of many. There are many solutions out there to help solve for the crisis of caregiving benefits for employees. Download this RFP template, customize it for exactly what your workforce needs, and evaluate what will work best based on what you learned from that survey. I have 33 seconds. Thank you so much for your time.